Welcome to the deep dive. So we've had some really interesting sources sent over touching on something I think many of us just assume. Tests mean stress.
Right. It feels almost automatic, doesn't it?
Yeah. But today we're diving into research, actually a whole collection of studies, a meta-analysis that asks a pretty counterintuitive question.
Which is, do things like practice tests, quizzes, actually end up reducing test anxiety? Or do they make it worse?
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack what this big chunk of research tells us about that relationship between practice and nerves and, well, what it means for how we learn best.
It's definitely a question that hits home for a lot of people. That word test alone can bring up feelings of, well, dread sometimes.
Totally.
But the really fascinating thing here, looking across 24 different studies with over 300 people,
Wow.
is that the evidence suggests the very thing we might think causes stress, these practice tests, could actually be key to feeling less anxious overall.
Hold on. So you're saying all that sweaty palm feeling before a pop quiz, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
The research actually suggests those little tests along the way might train us, train our brains to be calmer when the big one comes.
That's what the overall trend in the data points towards, yeah. It's a bit of a twist on the common narrative.
Okay, that is a twist. How big of an effect are we talking about? Is it a tiny reduction or something noticeable?
They measured it using something called an effect size, and they found what's considered a medium effect, which is, statistically significant and practically noticeable.
Medium effect. Okay, so like you'd actually feel a bit less worried.
That's the idea. They calculated this measure, Hedges G, as minus 0.52. The minus sign is key. It tells us anxiety went down.
Got it. Less anxiety.
But maybe even more convincing was the Bayesian evidence. They found the evidence supporting the idea that practice tests reduce anxiety was incredibly strong. The number they gave was BF10 greater than 25,000.
Wait, 25,000?
Yeah, think of it like the odds being 25,000 to 1 in favor of that conclusion based on the data they analyzed. It's overwhelming evidence pointing in one direction.
Okay, wow. So this isn't just like a fluke from one small study. It's a pattern across a lot of research. You mentioned the SCOPE 24 studies.
That's right, 24 separate studies, which yielded 25 different effect sizes for them to pool together, and drawn from the experiences of 3,374 participants.
That's substantial.
It is. And another really important detail is where most of this research happened.
Right, not just in some artificial lab setting.
Exactly. The vast majority, 22 out of those 25 results, came from real classrooms.
Okay, that feels more applicable to, actual students.
Definitely. And often these weren't just single one-off practice tests. Many of the studies involve students taking multiple practice tests over a period of time. Think weekly quizzes throughout a term or semester.
Ah, so repetition is maybe part of it.
It seems likely. The researchers specifically contrasted this with the few studies done in labs where maybe someone took just one practice test and their stress was measured, right then and there.
Yeah, that sounds different. A one-off test under observation versus a regular classroom quiz. They probably feel quite distinct.
Very likely, yes. The context and the repeated exposure seem important.
Did they mention any specific examples of those classroom studies, like one that really showed this repeated testing effect?
They did point to one study by Hayam and colleagues from 2022. It was apparently a good example.
What did that one involve?
It took place in an Intro to Psychology course, and the students in that class had, get this, 3 practice tests every week throughout the whole semester.
3 a week. Wow.
Yeah, consistent, low-stakes engagement. And the meta-analysis suggests that a kind of regular exposure in a familiar setting is probably a big reason why they saw this overall anxiety-reducing effect.
Okay, so the big picture is regular practice tests, especially in class, seem linked to lower anxiety later on. But learning's rarely simple, right? Did they find that all practice tests work this way? Or are some better than others?
That's a really important question, and yes, they looked into that. They did what's called a moderator analysis.
Moderator analysis, meaning they checked if other factors changed the main result.
Precisely. They looked at different characteristics of the studies and the tests to see what might influence the relationship with anxiety. And one really key factor emerged: the difficulty of the practice tests.
Oh, okay. So, like, if a practice test is brutally hard and makes everyone feel lost, maybe that doesn't help with anxiety.
Exactly right. The findings suggest that practice tests perceived as Easier, or maybe more accurately, appropriately challenging.
Right. Achievable.
Achievable, yes. Those tend to be more effective at reducing test anxiety compared to practice tests that are seen as very difficult.
That makes intuitive sense, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, think about it. If every practice session feels like a failure or incredibly stressful, that could easily backfire and make you dread the real thing even more.
Yeah, it reinforces the idea that tests are impossible.
Right. But if the practice builds your confidence, helps you solidify what, feels manageable,
Yeah.
that's more likely to create a positive association and actually lower your anxiety for the higher stakes situations. It's a really practical takeaway.
Absolutely. Build confidence, reduce fear. Okay, but what about the instructor side? Sometimes teachers worry about quizzes taking up class time or maybe that they don't help all students equally. Did this research touch on those concerns?
The authors of the meta-analysis did briefly acknowledge those points.
Yeah.
They mentioned that educators might have practical concerns, like the time needed for regular quizzing,
Sure, planning and grading time.
and also the potential worry about whether quizzes could widen achievement gaps.
Right, if some students consistently do poorly on them.
Exactly. Now, their main focus was squarely on the anxiety piece, but they did reference other research, specifically some work by Yang and colleagues that apparently digs into those broader issues and maybe offers solutions.
Okay, so resources exist for those other questions. But this study was really zeroed in on the anxiety connection.
That's the core of this specific meta-analysis, yes.
But did they offer any thoughts on how to make quizzes, less anxiety-provoking in the first place, especially if the goal is to reduce overall test stress?
They did. They brought up the idea of gamification.
Like making it a game.
Basically, yeah, turning quizzes into something that feels less like a formal evaluation and more like an engaging, maybe even fun learning activity.
Okay, how would that work?
Well, they gave examples of platforms people might already know, like Kahoots,
Oh yeah, Kahoot's huge in schools.
right? And Quizlet, Itapuzzle, Quizzes, even just using clicker systems in a lecture hall.
Things that add points, leaderboards, maybe music.
Exactly. Those game-like elements, competition, immediate feedback, interactive formats can shift the feeling around it, make it seem less threatening.
That's a great point. Framing matters. If it feels like a low-stakes game, you're probably less likely to tense up.
That seems to be the logic. Change the experience to change the emotional response.
Okay. Now, whenever you look at a meta-analysis combining lots of studies, there's always that question. Are we seeing the whole picture? What about studies that didn't find an effect? Did they look at publication bias?
Good question. Yes, they did assess for publication bias. That's the potential issue where studies showing, say, a positive or significant result are just more likely to get published than studies finding nothing much.
Right, the file drawer problem.
Exactly. But the encouraging finding here was that they found minimal evidence of publication bias in this set of studies.
Oh, that's good.
It is. It boosts confidence in their main conclusion that practice tests generally do seem to reduce anxiety because it suggests the result isn't just an artifact of only the positive studies seeing the light of day.
Definitely reassuring. So, pulling it all together, it sounds like a pretty solid case. Practice tests, done regularly, maybe leaning towards achievable difficulty,
Yeah.
they can actually lower test anxiety.
That's the strong signal coming from this large body of research, yeah.
Did the researchers suggest where things might go next? Like, what are the unanswered questions?
They touched on that briefly. They basically said that while this meta-analysis gives a really robust snapshot of what we know now, our understanding of exactly how practice tests and anxiety interact is still, developing.
Still more to learn.
Always. They implied there are more nuances to explore, more specific questions to ask, but they didn't lay out a detailed roadmap themselves. It's just the nature of science answers lead to more questions.
Right. Okay, so if everyone listening, wrapping your head around this,
Yeah.
the big takeaway from our deep dive seems clear. That feeling, the tests always equal more anxiety. Maybe not so true.
Yeah, the research really challenges that assumption. It suggests regular practice, especially if it's not overwhelmingly hard, can genuinely lead to feeling less anxious over time. A pretty significant reduction, in fact.
And thinking about how we learn, it suggests actively working with the material, even if it feels a bit like being tested, has these unexpected psychological perks.
Exactly. It helps you feel more confident, more comfortable with the material and the process, which then seems to dial down the anxiety when the stakes are higher.
So a question maybe for you listening, thinking about your own learning, or maybe if you're involved in teaching or training, what kind of low-stakes practice could you build in? intentionally to foster that confidence and maybe lessen the dread around bigger evaluations.
It really makes you rethink the role of assessment, doesn't it?
It does. And maybe a final thought to chew on.
Go on.
Could it be that just the act of frequently engaging with something, even in a way that feels a bit like evaluation, is actually a core part of mastering it and feeling more at ease with it?
That's a fascinating extension. Like, the familiarity breeds comfort, not just competence.
Maybe. Yeah. And perhaps that applies way beyond academic tests, right?
Yeah.
Think about public speaking, difficult conversations, any performance situation.
That's really interesting. Could regular low-pressure practice be the antidote to anxiety in all sorts of domains?
Oh,
Powerful than we realize. Something to definitely think about.